Well, good morning, all.
Morning.
It's always going to be the one. We are continuing on through our Matthew study in Matthew 18, but we are addressing a point that's already been discussed and mentioned during the Sermon on the Mount. That if we want to be effective as fishers of men, so in that sermon is where that statement is being made. That these are the tools, or these are the different lures and baits that are going to be used inside of our tackle box to go out and effectively be able to draw men in. But even with what's being presented, these are the same tools and the same elements that are going to be designed so as to keep people in once we get them in. So the same elements that are being used to bring people in are the same elements to keep us here. And what is going to be primary in that is in changing my view of others. So we've already gone through our introductory material, and the question is being raised about who's going to be the greatest. Well, in order for us to see greatness as God sees greatness, we're going to change some things in changing our perspectives on others. But as we said in our discussion on the Sermon on the Mount, in being able to change my view of others, that starts by changing the view of ourselves. And so as we go through this chapter, and chapter 19, chapter 20, as we said, it's one big section, and we have the descriptions that are being made about others. I do not need to forget that those descriptions are also talking about me. And many times as we go through our studies, that's how we read the Bible, and that's how we go through it. Oh yeah, that's so-and-so. That's how I'm supposed to look at all of you. No, when I'm going through this, and if I were here, and I'm with the apostles, the disciples, and Jesus is presenting this information, he is talking to them. That you look at others like this, and you need to see yourself the same way. And that's the only way that this stuff is going to work, is if we're putting each other on the same level, on the same playing field. All right? So 1 through 6, just to get our groundwork for where we're fixing to get in, what we're fixing to get into. At the same time came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Jesus called a little child unto him, and set him in the midst of them, and said, verily I say unto you, except ye be converted, become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. We now are going to have a shift in target in the subject, which really in this we've not left our subject. The subject of this discussion is the disciples, not this little child. The little child is just an illustration. The subject, the ones that are needing to get this information, the target audience are the disciples. So, and we've already established that from our previous study and looking at the parallel passages. Jesus makes this statement, and then we have descriptions given to us as to who the little ones are going to be inside of this discussion. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoso shall receive one such little child in my name, receive me. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones, who are the little ones? Jesus tells us right in the text, which believe in me. So we're not talking about children when we're talking about these little ones. And even when he says here, whoso shall receive one of these little child in my name receiveth me, he is talking about believers and those that we would start looking at as being least esteemed or little ones. It were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. So as we said, going to our parallel passages, Mark 9:37, whosoever shall receive one of such children in my name receiveth me, and whosoever shall receive me receiveth not me, but him that sent me. And John answered him, saying, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and he followeth not us. Here's an example of one of your little ones. Here's somebody that's not in our group. He's not a part of our clique. And we told him to stop. Who are you to tell him to stop? Why are you looking down on him as though he's beneath you, that you're able to give him orders and give him commands? And Jesus says that. And we forbade him because he followeth not us. But Jesus said, forbid him not, for there is no man which shall do a miracle in my name that can lightly speak evil of me. Luke 9:49 records the same point and the same discussion. But Luke tells us of another group of little ones, and sent messengers before his face, and they went and entered into a village of the Samaritans. How do the Jews view the Samaritans? Jordan said, yucky. They're dogs. They're half-breeds. They were out there marrying people that they shouldn't have been marrying. They have created their own law system. But they're still Jews. They're still brethren. But here are little ones, those that are despised, that the apostles are going to automatically look down on, and we can see that from what happens next. And they did not receive him because his face was as though he would go to Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them even as Elias did? Here are ones that are despised, viewed as insignificant. Matthew 20:30-31. You have the blind men that are going to follow after Jesus, and they cried out, but the crowd rebuked them. Why would they do that? It's because of how they're looking at them. Now, not only that, but we've already had this discussion of little ones back in Matthew 10:41 and 42. He that receiveth a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. And he that receiveth a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. Whosoever shall give to drink unto one of these little ones a cup of cold water only in the name of a disciple, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward. What's the point in having this conversation like this? I mean, put yourself in it. If you had to choose which one you would want to be more helpful to, who would it be? Who would we see as being more important?
Children.
Are you sure? It's not the case with the apostles. It's not the case with the disciples. A righteous man, a prophet. Two categories of people being talked about. Who would be more important? Prophet. Just go ahead. Go ahead and deal with it. The mindset of the people is, oh, here's a prophet. We got to take care of him. But then you just got some righteous man over here on the side. Well, he's not on the same level as a prophet. Oh, really? Since when? Since when do we start being able to gauge in this fashion? Now, we know this goes on today. When people who are just flat out worldly and they live like the devil, but then when I come around, how do they want to behave? They want to start acting like saints all of a sudden. Oh, here's a holy man. They're playing this game to where they're wanting to categorize people as being higher up in the chain than others. You can see it in the Roman Catholic Church with their hierarchy, bishops, cardinals, the Pope, all that kind of stuff. Even inside the denominational world, you got the pastor, and then you got a deacon's board, and blah, blah, blah. But who's at the top? Here's the pastor. We got to take care of him. He's important. Jesus lays all of that bare, lays it to rest, and he says, no. These are just as important as these. That one that's out there performing miracles in my name, he's just as important as you as an apostle. These Samaritans, they are just as important as the rest of Israel. We're not to get into this game of comparison. And that's what Paul said to the Corinthians, was it not? What was one of the problems, which they had many problems, but one of the problems inside of Corinth, actually, I don't even think we got into that. I think that's in the second letter. Okay.
But they were doing the Apollos.
All right. So in chapter 1 of 1 Corinthians, part of their problem, well, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Cephas. What is that? Well, somebody's better than the rest. And then in the second letter, Paul says, we do not compare ourselves by ourselves. That's not how we're measuring. But that's the game we get into. And why is it? Well, it's human nature. We want to be appreciated. We want to be recognized. And Jesus sets the record straight as to who is actually getting recognition here. You're one and the same. To where we even pointed that out in our 1 Corinthians study at the end of the letter. Paul says that he's sending somebody to them. Who did he send? Okay, he wanted to send Apollos, but Apollos said no. He sent Timothy. Now, when he sent Timothy, he encouraged the Corinthians to behave a certain way to Timothy. And why? He asked them to receive him, but why? He gives a description about what Timothy was doing. And we made a big point about it. No. Well, so you're getting it's either Philippians or one of the Timothys where he references that there's no man like Timothy that I have that will care for your souls in the way that he will. But specifically in the Corinthian letter, Paul writes to them and says, you received Timothy, and here's the reason why. What about the work that Timothy was doing? Paul makes a comparison in the work. Paul says about Timothy, he's doing the same work that I am. Huh? Okay. That's fine. Use your notes. This is open notes. So what about Timothy and Paul? Is anyone better? Anyone higher than the other? No. But the apostles in the early stage, they're playing this game. Well, you're little and I'm bigger. Therefore, I can treat you certain ways. And Jesus is going to address that when he gets to Matthew 25. Can't do that. But here's what's going on. Now, so as we've been discussing, there's no rank inside of the kingdom. Now, why would the apostles have this mindset towards these different classes of people? And I actually just gave the answer away. The answer is in the question.
Because they divided them in these people.
Okay. They are in the business of dividing people up into classes. You don't do that. It's a problem with position and power. And it starts with how they're looking at each other. And if we fall into the same trap to where we're eyeballing one another, then what's that going to do when we start trying to help others? It produces a bad situation. What's the saying about absolute power? It corrupts, absolutely. Those that are going to be in leadership, elders, deacons, evangelists, preachers, teachers, husbands, have to learn from this. that just because you are given a certain position does not necessarily put you above everybody else. And our brotherhood has an issue with this when it comes to the eldership. They think with the eldership, well, they're the leader, so therefore whatever they say goes. Since when? What gives them that position and that power? Well, they have the rule. Yes, they have the rule. But they're members of the body just like everybody else. They're flesh, just like everybody else. They are, in fact, in a position to be corrected. And they do not need to take their position to be, and Peter writes about it, to where they lord over the flock. It's not what we're doing here. And Jesus addresses that way early in this section before the apostles are going to be given their thrones to sit over in judgment of the kingdom when Jesus leaves. So when we start trying to figure out where we are in the pecking order, then we'll start trying to put people underneath us. And that's not what we're supposed to be doing. All right? Dropping down to verse 7. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come. Verse 7 shows where offenses originate. Woe unto the world because of offenses. They originate with worldliness. So when we start having offenses, troubles, we need to start questioning. We need to start asking ourselves, is this a sin? Or is this just some worldly, carnal, fleshly problem on my part? Then we have shown to us the serious nature of what's happening here. And this is the same thing that was discussed back in Matthew chapter 5. Wherefore, if thy hand or thy foot offend thee, cut them off and cast them from thee. It is better for thee to enter into life halt or maimed, rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into everlasting fire. And if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. It is better for thee to enter into life with 1 eye, rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hell fire. If we want to be great in the church, Jesus is again illustrating we must see sinfulness for what it is. We have to see sin for how bad it really is. Not just in others, but in myself. And in fact, the proverb writer says, Proverbs 14:9, fools make a mock at sin. And we've got a lot of this going on today. Not just out in the world, not just in denominationalism, but even in the Lord's church. To where brethren want to act like sin is not as bad as it really is. Jesus is showing us here, sin is not a joke. When it comes in our life, and then we want to treat it as something trivial. Well, that's just not that big of a deal. I can push it to the side. I can ignore it. I can try to hush it up. Then we will not reach the level of greatness that we ought to. And even when it comes to this point here of doing what Jesus says needs to be done, when there is sin in my life, I won't do it. I won't try to cut it out. I'll just try to make excuses for it. Because we are creatures of habit. We are creatures that desire the path of least resistance. But we've already studied in Matthew chapter 7 and comparing it over to Luke's account. It's a narrow way, but what's the other description? It's a straight or agonizing way. This is not the path of least resistance. This is a struggle. Now, this is being said before the section about the lost sheep. And that's important because if we do not see sin as being as serious as it is, then what about a brother or a sister that gets overtaken with sin? And what Jesus is about to illustrate.
They're going to stay up in the mountains.
They're going to stay up there and nobody will go get them. Not that big of a deal. We'll just let them go. No. The contrast is being made. Cut this off. Cast this out. Better to be halt or maimed than to be lost, cast into everlasting fire. This is the depth and the level that we are supposed to be ready to meet. Then I would be willing to cut off a limb to make it to heaven. Yeah, definitely for me, because I would be, just even trying to attempt it, I would be gone. And even as we discussed in Matthew chapter 7, a delicate and sensitive area like the eye. I mean, you just get a tiny little speck of dust in your eye and you freak out. It's like, this is terrible. Now just imagine having to pluck it out. But to do that so as to gain heaven is worth it. So as to gain eternal life. That's what we're aiming for. So then Jesus says, take heed that you despise not one of these little ones, for I say unto you that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. Now I wanted to revisit all of that discussion about little ones so that when we got here, this would be easier to explain. This applies to children, but this is not talking about children. Here are the apostles, the disciples, and they're arguing about who's the greatest, who's going to be on top, and then who's going to be underneath them. Who's going to be the little ones? And Jesus says, you're looking at it the wrong way. That you're wanting to look at somebody as being superior and that these ones do not matter as much. That word despise is going to come into play. And let's see, I don't want to get too far ahead of my notes. Okay, apparently I didn't put them in my notes. So, the word despise can also be translated as to disesteem. Anybody know what it means to despise or to disesteem someone? Pretty obvious from the context. You view them as being least. You just look at them as being less important. But here Jesus sets the record straight and he says, no. Do not despise these little ones, for I say unto you that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. Going back to Matthew 10 and the prophet and the righteous man. It would be very easy to start thinking, well, God cares about the prophet more than he cares about the righteous man. But what has Jesus just said? God cares about the righteous man the same way that he cares about the prophet. God cares about the evangelist the same way that he cares about the apostles. God cares about every single member of the church the same way that he cares about the elders. God is not looking at anybody as being better than anybody else inside of the body. So how should we start looking at everybody? We should be viewing everybody the same way that God sees them. So the children here are just an example. The subjects are the adults. No one is more important or more valuable than anyone else. And the tendency is that we start thinking of ourselves higher than we should. We discussed that last week in our sermon about humbleness and how Paul addressed that in Romans. And when we start viewing ourselves higher than we should, we start abusing the ones that are beneath us. We start talking to them in certain ways that, oh, well, I wouldn't talk to Micah like this, but I can talk to this person like this because I see them as being beneath me. No. If you wouldn't talk to me like that, then you shouldn't talk to anybody else like that. And that's what's going on here. So this is setting the framework for everything that we dealt with in our Corinthians study. The Corinthians letter is about fixing problems, church issues. Jesus already dealt with it. This is the foundation. But to counter this is going to be the remembrance of the needs, or the fact that there needs to be a remembrance that God is watching. And like we're jumping way ahead, but Matthew 24, Matthew 25, Jesus is going to have that discussion about the fact that he's going to leave. And he has that discussion of the household and the two classes of servants. We have the good servants, and they're going to take care of things like they should. But then there's another class of servants, those that do not think that the master is going to return. And Jesus describes it very well. And he says, those ones that think that the master is not going to return and that the master is not watching, they beat and they strike their fellow servants. Now, why do they think they can do that? Because they view them as being little. Huh? And that no one's watching. But Jesus lays it out. These little ones, that one that's out there by himself, that's not with your clique, he's not with the apostles. Angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. Those Samaritans that you're wanting to burn with fire, they have angels that do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. God is watching all the time. And he doesn't play this game that we're playing. Now, what exactly this means, I do not know. What are they doing? What are the angels doing before the face of the Father? I don't know. That's not described to us. But I know that something is going on in the unseen realm. That should be a comfort, but also should be an area of great concern. Because when I think about just everything that's gone on in my life in the past 2 years, and how it seems like certain people are just getting away with wickedness, and how it is that those individuals see me as just being some little one that they can treat however they want to, this is a comfort. God is watching. And that at some point, retribution is going to be dealt out. But while I find that as a comfort, it's a humbling and concerning element that I do not need to turn around and fall into the same trap. that as we are dealing with one another here, it's not just us dealing with each other. There's another side of this, there's another realm, and that there are individuals watching and speaking on our behalf. Now, while I do not know exactly what's going on, I do know that this passage is not used correctly by those that would try to use this for guardian angels and how they watch over children and all that kind of stuff. Because the description is that they're before the face of God in heaven. They're not here on earth. So that's strike number one. Strike number two is in the fact that if it is the case that you've got these guardian angels that are out here doing all these miraculous things so as to keep people out of trouble, why do people fall into trouble or die? Anything like that? Was the angel sleeping? Was the angel off doing something else? Union rules, he's got to take a break for 15 minutes. None of that makes sense. But a lot of that stems from the problem that we've been addressing here, that they look at this and they say, oh, little ones, that's talking about children. No, we've moved from that. We're talking about problems that are going to creep up inside of the Lord's church, and those that are going to abuse these little ones. And it's not even going on inside the church. It's already happening inside of Israel, is it not? You have the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they're in charge. And what are they doing? Think about little ones. What are the Pharisees doing? Matthew 23.
Well, they bind things that they shouldn't.
Okay.
They don't teach the law appropriately when they're the givers of the law.
Okay.
And so they don't take that responsibility very well. They despise it in that sense. They look on them as nothing. They're people to oppress, and only their station in life matters.
So with the people that they are oppressing, now they're oppressing everybody, but Jesus calls out two classes of people specifically. Think about who are the weakest.
The orphans and the widows.
Okay, there you go. This happens all around. To where we view these people, the weakest of us, and we think we can just roll over them and that we're going to get away with it. But here Jesus is pointing out, even for the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So this is applicable to the church, but it's applicable to the world too. God cares about the weakest. The widows, man, you go back into the law of Moses, and I think we did it in our Corinthians study. You go back into the law of Moses and you see the kind of protection that God put around widows. And then you get over here and you think that you can rob a widow? Man, you are crazy. Or the orphan, the fatherless, that you can abuse them and that you'll get away with it? There's no way. But even from that extreme, even to just the ones that we have sitting here, for me to think that I can take my position, and just as James said, like with the Pharisees, and I can start binding things on you guys that shouldn't be bound just because I'm in the position that I'm in. Can't do that and think I'm going to get away with it. So this helps us within the realm of mercy. I'm not going to abuse you because I wouldn't want you to abuse me. I'm not going to look at you this way because I don't want you to look at me this way. It's all reciprocal. And so, in fact, we have in this other lesson of how to be great, it's in dealing with personal relationships. How we're going to view and deal with one another. This is it. So, let's see. Okay. Also, some helpful verses in regards to, the fact of that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven, in view of and considering this phrase or this line about beholding the face of my Father. A reading of Exodus 33. Exodus 33, and Moses seeing the glory of God while he was in Mount Sinai. Numbers chapter 6, and there's even some cross references to Deuteronomy as well. But I plan on producing or building a lot of that into a sermon, not for next week, but it'll be the following week, Lord willing, in dealing with that phraseology and about seeing the face of God, to give us some insight as to what that is saying, and especially in the mind of a Jew, an Israelite, when it's being referenced, because they would be used to hearing that term and beholding the face of God. So we'll save some of that for later. So any questions, thoughts, questions, comments, as we're looking at that before we get into the section with the sheep?
I was just thinking, when you're talking about the prophets, and we look at the prophets, and well, they're talking for God, so they're obviously more important than us, or whoever. We start doing that. It's just like I'm thinking about Dan's house, working on it. You've got the demolition tools. They're used for those 3 days. They're very important for the demolition day, and a mudding knife isn't going to do anything.
Yeah.
Right? But now it's coming to mudding time. The mudding knife is going to come in. So that's how it is. It's like the prophet was gifted. That's all. They're only used as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
Here you go. You get to speak for me, but you're not any more important than anybody else. That's just what I was thinking.
And so, again, that connects into our Corinthians study, 1 Corinthians 12, 13, 14. We are all members of a body. Is any member of your body more important than the other? No. Is your brain more important than your pinky toe? No, they need each other. And it's even coming to the point, it's amazing how much science has to catch up with God's design. Those weaker elements of the body that for so many years doctors thought weren't doing anything, like your appendix. And God put it there, it's doing something. It's just, we can get rid of that. And now they're finding out, well, no, your appendix is actually more important than we thought. The gallbladder, thyroid, your tonsils, all we just get rid of that. No, you start removing that stuff, you have bigger issues. Same thing with us. The hand is not more important than the foot. The mouth is not more important than the eyes. You start having to lose one of those things, yeah, life can go on, but it's harder. So it's the same thing in Christianity. But as we're pointing out, we get into that trap. We fall into that snare. All right? All right, so nothing else, and we'll move on. Verse 11, for the Son of Man is come to save that which was lost. How think ye, if a man have 100 sheep, and one of them be gone astray, doth he not leave the 99, goeth into the mountains, and seek that which is gone astray? If we want to be great in the kingdom, then we must see the value of every soul. Every soul that's here, every soul that's out there. Verse 11, the Son of Man is come to seek and to save the lost. That is anyone and everyone. God is interested in the redemption of man. That's what Jesus is illustrating here. So if that's what God is interested in, what are we need to be interested in? We need to be interested in the redemption of every man. The apostles, at this point, they're wanting to categorize people. They're not as important in saving as this other class of people are important in saving. Jesus says, no. If they are lost, they need to be saved. It doesn't matter who they are. In verse 12, we are able to view just how much effort is needing to be put forth in the saving of just one soul. If a man have 100 sheep, and one of them be gone astray, doth he not leave the 99 and goeth into the mountains, and seeketh that which is gone astray? Goeth into the mountains. I don't know that I could really appreciate this section the way that I needed to before getting here. Because, yeah, we've got the Blue Ridge in Virginia, but it's, with being here contrasted to being there, it's pretty tame, pretty mild. But in going on that one hike, man, that just left a mark on me. With Reese and Jordan, and to know what it's like to go into the mountains. This is not easy. This is dangerous, perilous. There are bears up there. There are mountain lions up there. There are thieves, robbers, who want to seclude themselves and hide out in the mountains. The weather can change in the blink of an eye. Rock slides. You take one step, one wrong step, and you're falling over the edge. Or you're getting hurt. You're breaking a leg. And then you're just stuck up there. But we're taking all of that, all of those things that would keep us from going and doing what we're supposed to do, when we set them to the side. All of those things would be excuses so as to keep us from going and doing what we need to do with the one lost sheep. And guess what? If we allow those excuses to keep us from doing what we need to do out of fear that, well, we won't be able to get the sheep, what are we actually bringing about? We don't act because, well, we don't want to lose the sheep. But what are you actually determining that's going to happen 100% if you do not act? You've lost the sheep. So it's better to go ahead and try and lose than not to try at all and for sure lose the one sheep. So even with this, we're right back in Matthew chapter 7 with the man that built his house on the sand. And I believe at that time we were actually dealing with flooding in this state. And we were putting ourselves in that situation. Just imagine, put yourself in that. You're up here on a hill, your house is built, but then you got your neighbor down there in the valley, and you're seeing their house be swept away. And it's just, how would that make you feel? It'd be terrible. They've lost everything. And that's the illustration Jesus is giving when it comes to sin. Sin takes everything. And we mentioned how that it's not just a danger for the one that built his house on the sand, but what could be the mindset of the person who's up on the hill, you on the hill, and you see your neighbors being swept away? What's going to kick in? Go save them, which means your life is now in danger. When we get involved in sin, we start thinking about, well, this isn't going to affect anybody else but me. You better think again. You're going to get wrapped up in sin. Somebody's going to have to come and get you. And you need to start thinking about them in that situation. What's this going to do to them? Are they going to be swept away with me? Are they going to get hurt in this? As I'm out here wandering away? Changing our view of every aspect, of everything, of ourselves. What I'm wanting to do is not more important than what everybody else needs. But all of this is showing us the effort in going after one lost soul. And if so be that he find it, verily I say unto you, he rejoiceth more of that sheep than of the 99 which went not astray. Even so it is not the will of your Father which is in heaven, that one of these little ones should perish. So even going, not trying to, overbeat the point, but if we're going to look at this in the context, and it's, well, Jesus is talking specifically about children, then okay, in this context, Jesus is specifically talking about sheep. Nobody does that in this section. They all realize, okay, we're talking about these little ones, these believers, these little members of the church. Then you need to take that back into the other place. Deal with this fairly. But again, we're being shown a glimpse as to what's going on in the unseen realm. This is the illustration used before moving into our personal relationships. Verse 15 is going to start in dealing with problems inside of the church. How we are going to deal with each other. This is it. This is the mindset. If so be that he find it, verily I say unto you, he rejoiceth more of that sheep than of the 99 which went not astray. Now again, why is this? Because the 99 are fine. They're protected. But then you just start thinking about this little one and that it's lost up there. Now, since we're using these illustrations, let's move it from sheep and let's put it in the frame of a little child. And actually, not too long ago, we had a child go missing. Was it here local? It was pretty close by that a child went missing. Yeah, the 4-year-old that went missing up in the mountains. How do you think people dealt with that? It was night and day, 24/7. We've got to find this kid. Why? Because he's out there all alone. He's out there in the elements. Oh, he's just a little kid, doesn't matter. No. If there was anybody that matters the most, it's the little ones. It's the most vulnerable. So, what about inside of the church? When we are considering those that need the most compassionate response and just the willingness and desire to go after them, is the one that leaves. And it's this section. I mean, we have tons of brethren that they will teach on this. And I'm sure a lot of our brethren know this by heart, but then they do not want to connect it to this. This is where Jesus is leading them. Offenses, problems, they're going to happen. Why do they happen? More than likely, it's usually because of worldliness, carnality. How do we fix it? It has to start here. If you do not start here, church discipline, church correction will never work. And that's part of the reason why. A lot of the times inside of our brotherhood, when it comes to elders or brethren trying to correct somebody inside of the church, it doesn't work because they don't put this with it. But when we're considering what's being presented, as we said, we're going through this, we're making the application to others, but I need to make the application to me also. If this is going to work, then this mindset has to be on both sides. If I am the corrector, I need to be thinking about this. And if you are the one being corrected, this is what needs to come into play. We need to view this as the possibility. Okay, am I the sheep that's going astray? Now, in dealing with this, so, all right, before we get into this, questions, comments, thoughts on that? All right. 15, 16. Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. Now, usually we think about this, or we think if someone is mad, or they're the ones that's been offended or trespassed against, then the person that did the trespassing should come to them. Well, that's not 100% wrong. But when we're taking all of this into consideration as to what Jesus is presenting, it could very well be the case that the person that has trespassed doesn't know that they've trespassed. So you, as being the one that is offended, take the initiative and you go to them. You express the problem. You don't run off to somebody else and start talking to them about what's going on. Here's the situation. And of course, we're dealing with this on the standpoint of a private matter. Tell it between thee and him alone, because nobody else knows about it. But if we start running off and we start telling other people, then we're going to start dividing up. And we're going to start building parties. And especially if we're only telling one side of the story and not taking into consideration the other side. So this is designed so as to keep it from getting to here. If we can keep this quiet and keep this between us so that nobody else knows, then that's the way it needs to be done. Because nobody else needs to know. But the only way that this is possible is if we have the beginning section and that we have a concern for souls. A soul is lost until this matter is corrected. So again, we're going back to Matthew chapter 5. Greatness is seen, exercised, by not letting a soul stay lost. Going after that one sheep. And just the mentality that, okay, I'm not going to let this rest. I'm not going to let this lie. And let's just say, Jordan does something to me. And instead of being concerned for him, I let my feelings get in the way. And I say, fine, I just won't have anything to do with Jordan. Both of us are in trouble. Potentially. Now I say potentially because we're going to get into these words about trespasses and offenses in just a moment. But what we have being set up as the background of this is Old Testament information. Leviticus 5:1, then dropping down to 14. God says, and if a soul sin and hear the voice of swearing and is a witness, whether he has seen or known of it, if he do not utter it, then he shall bear his iniquity. Our brethren have taken on the mindset of, well, it's none of my business. I don't need to get involved. No. If a soul sin and I know of it, I witness it, and if I do not utter it, if I do not say something, God is going to hold me accountable. We don't get to pass this to anybody else. When I see someone doing wrong and I know it's wrong, I cannot just let it go by. And why not? I shouldn't just be viewing it from the standpoint of, okay, well, I'll get in trouble too. A soul is lost. Leviticus 5:14, and the Lord spake unto Moses, and there's more about this in the middle, you can read that on your own time. If a soul commit a trespass and sin, notice, through ignorance. Under the law of Moses, they had prescription safeguards for those sins that I even commit that I don't even know that I'm committing. Because if you think about it, under the Old Testament system and the thousands of laws that they had to keep, you know you're going to break something at some point that you didn't even realize you were breaking.